Have you ever wondered if there's a sin that God won't forgive? Like maybe it's something you've done or something you've said or something you've thought that God can't or won't forgive. I've been a pastor now for a little bit over 15 years, and I can't tell you how many times somebody's pulled me aside after service or sent a message and asked some version of this question. What if I've gone too far? What if God won't forgive this? Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe it was something you screamed at God when your life was falling apart. Maybe it was a season where you walked away and wanted nothing to do with Him. Or maybe you were scrolling one night and stumbled across this verse and it's kind of been sitting in the back of your mind ever since. And maybe you've thought, I've committed the unforgivable sin. You see, I think that question deserves a real answer. And so in this video, we're going to look at what Jesus actually said. We're going to look at what it actually means and why the sin that you're most afraid of probably isn't the one that this verse is talking about. So let's take a look. Most people who are afraid of this passage, who are afraid of committing the unforgivable sin, have only read half of it. And so we need to start by looking at the full verse in Matthew 12, verse 31 and 32. Jesus says this, "And so I tell you, every kind of sin and slander can be forgiven, but blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. Anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but anyone who speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in this age or in the age to come." Did you catch that first sentence? Before Jesus says a single word about the unforgivable sin, he says this: every sin, every kind of slander is forgiven. All of it. And listen, this would have floored the people listening that day over 2,000 years ago. You see, under the Old Testament law, certain sins had no remedy. For example, blasphemy was a capital offense. No sacrifice covered it, no prayer fixed it, you were simply cut off. But then Jesus comes in and changes everything. He says, whatever you've done, whatever you've said, whatever you're going to do or say is forgiven. And don't rush past this sentence to get to the scary one. The headline of this passage is not a warning, it's grace. Now, there is one exception that's real and that we need to dive into, but you have to hold on to the grace and the warning together, or you're going to miss both. Now, to understand what this means, to understand what the unforgivable sin is, you have to pay attention to who Jesus is talking to. And in this passage, Jesus is talking to these scribes, and these aren't like confused outsiders. They were like the most theologically trained men of their day. They knew their stuff, and they were sent to Jerusalem to evaluate Jesus, and they watched him cast out these demons right in front of them. And that might sound strange to us today, but not for a first century Jewish scholar. The question they would be wondering was he casting out the demons by the power of God or by some other power? And so they say to him, he is possessed by Beelzebub, by the prince of the demons. He is driving out demons. Rather than seeing Jesus do these incredible miracles as evidence that he is the Son of God, they claim that Jesus is evil. And this is not like some innocent mistake. It's a deliberate accusation. And this is what Jesus is responding to when we looked at this verse, at this passage. It's a calculated, sustained, fully informed choice to call light darkness. So the question is, why can't this sin be forgiven? Why can't blasphemy against the Spirit be forgiven? And here's what most people get wrong about this. The reason that this sin is unforgivable isn't that God slams the door in that person's face. It's actually the other way around. It's the person who refuses to open the door in the first place. Hebrews 3:15 says, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." You see, this verse isn't warning about some catastrophic mistake that we can make that locks us out of God's love, out of his grace forever, ever. Rather, about the direction we choose to face our life in. Every time you hear something true and choose to look away, something in us shifts. Maybe not all the way, but the direction is getting established. And the scribes that day didn't arrive at that moment overnight. They got there through a long series of small choices, choosing their position over evidence, choosing comfort over disruption, choosing pride over truth. It was who they had become because they had made these series of decisions. And at that point, it's not that forgiveness is unavailable, it's that they will never ask for it. You cannot receive forgiveness if you will never seek it. You see, the unforgivable sin isn't the one that you're afraid you've committed. It's the one you never lose sleep over. Think about how Jesus describes the hardened heart and what it actually looks like. It's not tormented. It's not lying awake at night wondering if grace is still possible, wondering if they've gone too far. No, it's the person who genuinely doesn't feel any of that. You see, tender hearts fear the lines that they have or haven't crossed, but hard hearts stop caring that there was even a line to begin with. Look at who didn't commit the sin. Paul himself calls himself a blasphemer and a persecutor and a violent man, but he was shown mercy. Jesus' own family, in the same passage where this warning appears, thought he was losing his mind. And even most of the leaders who handed Jesus over to be crucified, Peter says in Acts 3, acted in ignorance. And the same Jesus who gave this warning moved towards the woman in the crowd who they wanted to stone. And Jesus restored Peter 3 times after he denied him. He stopped Paul on the road where Paul is heading literally to arrest more Christians. What we see all throughout the Bible is not a God who's scanning the horizon to shut out sincere people. No, God wants to save people. He wants to extend grace towards people. He wants to rescue and heal and restore people. That's his heart. Not to punish, but to rescue. So if you're carrying this fear, I want you to hear this. The fear of committing an unforgivable sin is evidence not against you, but actually for you. It's revealing your heart, and your heart isn't somebody who's committed this unforgivable sin. It's somebody whose heart is still tender. And Jesus is moving towards you, not away from you. Now, I know some of you have heard this before, and you know the drill. You feel better for a few minutes, but then that fear just keeps coming back. And I know this because I've talked to people for whom this has been a pattern for years. They hear these kinds of reassurances, they feel relief, then the fear returns. Sometimes stronger than before, and they're back where they started, seeking more reassurance, getting more temporary relief, and then around and around they go. And for some people, this isn't a theology problem. The theology is clear, they even know it, they can explain it, but it just doesn't stick. And the reason it doesn't stick isn't always a lack of faith. Sometimes what they're dealing with is anxiety wearing these like religious clothes. And there's actually a name for it, scrupulosity. And it's a form of OCD where these intrusive thoughts, they attach to faith. And the cycle is fear, reassurance, relief, fear again, often stronger. And if you've been living in that loop, you don't need a better explanation of the passage. What you need is somebody in your corner, a pastor, a counselor, somebody who understands what's actually happening. You see, the kind of fear that this is almost always gets carried alone. Because how do you bring it up? Everyone around you looks like they have it all together, and you're sitting with this thing that you never say out loud, wondering if you've done one too many things where Jesus says, I'm not going to forgive you anything anymore. You're unforgivable. And so what do? You just sit with it. You say nothing, maybe you smile, maybe you show up on Sunday, but you still carry it home. But that isolation is part of what's making it heavier for you than it needs to be, because this fear thrives in the silence. And the reality is you don't have to carry this alone. Talk to somebody you trust. Talk to a pastor, talk to a counselor, talk to a friend who can handle the weight of what you're carrying. Bring it into the light, because that's where it will start to lose its grip. So, what do we do with all this? I don't want to sand off the edge of what Jesus said, because he didn't. The warning here in this passage is real. It's just aimed at a different kind of person than most people think. The scribes, some of the religious leaders of Jesus' day, they got there slowly. They got to this place of a hardened heart slowly by small choices repeated long enough to calcify into a posture. And none of us are immune to that slow drift. So the challenge for us today is to fight it, to keep our eyes on God. And don't miss this. We don't do this because God's grace is going to run out. His patience is going to run out. His love is going to run out. No, we do this because we can drift away from him where we'll think we don't need him or want him anymore. That's why we keep our eyes on God. And here's what I want you to walk away with. The enemy wants to tell you that you're too far gone, that you've made too many mistakes, that God doesn't love you or couldn't love you because of what you've done. He wants to tell you that. He wants you to live from that identity. But listen, it's not true. It's not true. In fact, if you feel that, if you've wondered that, it shows that your heart is still tender towards God. The unforgivable sin isn't the one that you're afraid of. It's the one that you don't care about anymore. So don't let fear of it keep you from the grace that God has for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it encouraged you to see the unforgivable sin in a new light. And if this kind of content is helpful for you, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss future videos that I have coming out. And if you want to dive deeper into stuff like this, I write a weekly newsletter called Rethink. It's theology you can actually use. It's not academic, not fluff, just practical biblical insights. You can sign up for that using the link down in the description. And hey, drop a comment. I'd love to know your thoughts on this topic. I'll see you next time.